Okay. Well, welcome. I'm Cynthia Long, Chair of CAMPO, along with my colleague.
Hi, good morning. I'm Councilwoman Melissa Cabello Haverda from San Antonio. Welcome.
And we're excited to be here. We sort of talked about this last year and wanting to get our executive committees together to take a little bit of a deeper dive. And so I want to welcome everybody on behalf of our CAMPO board, and thanks for our executive committee folks for coming out today. And I am looking forward to the discussion and the opportunity to further some really great ideas between our regions.
Thank you. Welcome.
Up is on.
Thanks. Okay, there we go. Welcome. I'm very excited about this meeting. I've been to one before. I think there was kind of a hiatus for the joint meeting, the CAMPO and MPO meetings. So this is the second one for me, but I'm very much looking forward to the presentations today and, of course, getting input from both regions. As we know, I say both regions, we're really all kind of one big region now. And so I'm excited to hear about how we can collaborate and join together. Thank you so much.
We are going to, just by way of agenda, we're going to take up item number 3 first, if that's okay. And if we can jump to 3 and then come back to 2 after that. Does that mess up the slide deck a little bit? Okay.
Yeah.
So Sid, are you or Ashby, who's taking the lead on that one?
Can we present from here? Is that okay?
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think we do have the slides brought up. Ashby and I are going to split this presentation, and I don't think either one of us purports to be greenhouse gas emissions experts, nor do we want to, I'm sure. This is a new performance measure that's required through the Federal Highway Administration. Performance measures were established through the FAST Act a few years ago, and FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, is responsible for actually setting what those performance standards should look like nationally. And you're probably familiar with some of the ones that we've adopted over the years through the MPO, including safety performance measures, rehabilitation performance measures, travel time performance measures. So this is a new one for us, and one that is probably causing a lot of questions and concerns around the country, but one that that we're in the process of trying to figure out ourselves here in Texas and for the MPO. And the requirement through the Federal Highway Administration states that the State Departments of Transportation and MPOs shall establish declining targets for reducing tailpipe carbon dioxide emissions on the national highway system. It's important to note that the rule does not require or mandate how the targets should be set, rather that they just reduce emissions over time. So the State Departments of Transportation nationally have to set 2- and 4-year statewide emission targets. Those 2 years should start from 2026, so obviously we'll be setting them this year. And then the MPOs have to set 4-year emission targets. We must establish those within 180 days or 6 months after the State Departments of Transportation establish those. There is an option to commit to support the State Department of Transportation performance measure, which is what we've done with a lot of the performance measures that we adopt locally in San Antonio, and I'm pretty sure Austin has done the same. And I'm assuming that that's probably what we'll do as well. However, there's a caveat here for our region. When more than one MPO shares an urbanized area, a unique target must be established for that urbanized area. And that is the case for us in San Marcos. The San Marcos urbanized area is separate from the Austin urbanized area, the census designated urbanized area. It does have a population of about 68,000, and it does bleed into Guadalupe County, which of course is part of the San Antonio MPO. San Marcos is part of the Austin MPO. And so because that urbanized area is shared between both MPOs, we must establish a joint target on this greenhouse gas emissions for that San Marcos urbanized area. And it's something that we have to establish together. It has to be a quantifiable target, but from what I understand today, and something that was brought up yesterday at our statewide MPO meeting, is that it can be the same as the one that the state sets, which is probably good. So at this point, whatever the state intends to set is probably what our MPO, at least in the Alamo area, will establish as our MPO. greenhouse gas emission reduction, and then what we can do, if we so jointly agree, is to establish the same target for that San Marcos urbanized area. Sorry, there's some additional, I think some of the slides that we deleted didn't come out of here, but just wanted to go to this timeline here. This kind of establishes over the next few years what, oh no, I'm sorry, I did skip a slide. This is an important one here, and I believe that the attorney for the CAMPO area has been brought up to speed on some of these conversations that have happened, but 22 states have challenged the greenhouse gas performance measure rule in federal court, including the state of Texas. Because of that, the Federal Highway Administration did extend the deadline for states to submit their initial targets. It was originally set for February the 1st. We now have until March 29th. I think that lawsuit is still ongoing, though, and I believe that again, the CAMPO attorney is here and may be able to provide some insight on where that lawsuit stands. So,
yeah, I'd like to hear more about.
Oh, I thought you were going to weigh in.
Oh, you better stop.
Yeah, the attorney wants to hear more from the attorney.
Hi, I'm Tim Tuggy. I'm counsel for CAMPO. Yes, we've been monitoring and talking with the Texas Attorney General's office as they have sought and temporarily at least obtained an injunction against enforcement of this rule. A federal court in Lubbock that has jurisdiction over the Texas action on this matter is due to make a decision, as mentioned here, by March 29. So this new deadline at the state level could kick in immediately, March 29 or after, depending upon what the judge says. Meanwhile, there's an action pending in Kentucky, a similar action by 19 states. Those two judges have obviously been talking because that judge also set a March 29 deadline. Depending upon that action and the judicial decision, if the Federal Highway is allowed to go forward, then it will trigger state compliance requirements and their issuance of their targets, and the 180-day clock will start ticking for the MPOs to identify their targets. So more to come. I spoke as recently as yesterday with the attorneys at OAG, Texas OAG, and everything's briefed and under consideration by the federal judge in Lubbock as we speak. So
Tim, to that extent, so the Kentucky action that's happening with the 19 states over there, would that have a possibility of having a national injunction, or is that just something separate for the applicable parties that are involved in that? Because obviously the one that's happening here in Texas would affect our jurisdiction.
Fifth Circuit,
Yeah.
right. It could, depending upon the terms of their order. If they decide to, basically what's under consideration is the issuance of a permanent injunction, and they could, as has been done with other similar laws, they could, by fiat, pronounce it as a national injunction, which of course triggers appeal rights at the appropriate appellate, and I'm sure the federal government will, either party's going to take this up. So if in fact the judges give the go-ahead with the rule, states will go up, or conversely, if they issue injunctions, EPA and Federal Highway will go up. So this is going to be in court for a while. The question, though, is if they let the rule go forward, state level DOT and MPO deadlines start ticking.
So you anticipated my next question on that. So if in fact they let it go through and you're going through the appellate process, obviously there's a possibility for the next level, at whatever circuit it's going to be in, to say, okay, listen, we're going to stay this while pending this appeal, or you can keep moving forward this enforcement.
Exactly.
From that aspect, Ashby, and I guess that's both for you, and said, if that's the case, how ready are we to go if in fact they say, cool, you guys can appeal it, but by the way, it's going to keep going on until it plays out in the courts?
So I won't attempt to speak for Sid, but so yesterday we had a meeting of the state MPO directors and the Federal Highway Administration gave a briefing on this. And what they said is they expect TxDOT to set a declining standard for this item of 0.1. And the way the statute language is written, we can use the same. And matter of fact, Federal Highway strongly encouraged us to use the same target, because they said if we don't, then we have to come up with all the data and justification for it. And if we do, then we don't have to do that. Additionally, for this joint target that we have to set between the two organizations for this San Marcos area, we can use the same 0.1.
Okay. Tim, anything else? Okay, thank you. Back to you, Sid.
All right. And for, again, for the Alamo area MPO, I think we would do the same as the state. It's what we've done. Again, that's a decision, obviously, that we have to take to our technical advisory committee, through the board. But that's what we've done with most of the other performance standards that have been set or that have been required of us nationally. And so, again, as Mr. Tuggy just noted, if the rule goes into effect, or if this allows to continue to move forward as FHWA has outlined, then the state has their requirement due March 29th, so just in a couple of weeks, or next week. And then the MPO, the clock starts for the MPO whenever the state sets their target. So let's say the state misses it. We have 180 days from whenever theirs is set. So we will have 6 months, regardless of whether the lawsuit puts it on hold, or whether the state takes longer, or whether the state sets it on March 29th. We have 6 months from that point on to set our target. And again, if we follow what the state does, we should have plenty of time to do that. And so right now, if everything were to continue the same, TxDOT meets their March 29th deadline, our deadline would be September 25th.
One thing I forgot to mention to your question earlier, there is no penalty if we miss the deadline.
Yes. There's actually no penalty. There's no penalty if you don't make the reduction either, to be fair. These are required to be set, well, right now, and I should make this.
Should we be
caveat.
saying this publicly?
No, well, I think our board always asks, what happens if we don't meet this target? The reality is that right now, there is no penalty. That could change in the future, and I'm assuming, that these performance measures are being set so that at some point in the future, there will be a penalty. Nothing is done for nothing, right? And so I'm assuming that at some point they will start enforcing these much more strictly, not just this performance measure, but others as well. And so in terms of the timeline, again, because these are already set in terms of milestone years on when the state has to do it and when the MPO has to do it, the next state report after this one will be due October 1st, 2026. Again, because the MPO has 6 months after that, our target will be April 2027. And then again, the state will be required to submit those again in October of 2030, or reestablish or reset their target. And then the MPO will have to do it as well in April of 2031. I'm going to turn it over to Ashby here, and he'll go through the rest of these few slides.
So before I go through the portion of the slides that I have, Tim, you might want to come back up again. So EPA put out documentation suggesting, trying to explain why they set the standard and the legality behind the standard, about 45 pages. There's a reference in there to the portion of the statute that talks about air quality conformity. You can be sued under conformity. The other parts are under the planning regulations, and you cannot be sued under the planning regulations. So I was reading that carefully, and I am not a lawyer before I tell you that I wanted to be, but I didn't have the money to go to law school. So when you read the documentation they provided, they do say, yes, this statute is here, but it doesn't mean anything. And I was like, well, why are you bringing it up if it doesn't mean anything? So I've been asking Federal Highways for 3 or 4 months now, are we going to be subject to litigation if we adopt this measure? They have not answered me. So I'm not trying to scare anybody off from setting the standard. So Tim and I have discussed that a little bit, and
Well, I think this is one aspect of the litigation, is just basically, essentially, does Federal Highway EPA have the authority to do what they're doing? And as I've reviewed the pleadings back and forth from the state and the various states that are in Kentucky, they all center upon whether or not there's authority, because under the state's argument, it's a stretch. There's a interpretation of the federal statutes that you could argue is aggressive, and that's fine. That's a policy decision. But is it legal? That's what the federal courts are there for. So that's the nub of the issue, and I think what Ashby's referring to is going to get resolved here. The good news is you're going to know something March 29. So get ready, one way or the other.
So they're not commenting because that's the ultimate question at issue. So we did our due diligence by continuously spamming them with emails saying, dude, what's up?
No harm in that,
Yeah,
but
okay. All right.
they're going to sit still until they see what the federal courts say. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. So this slide is basically to give everyone a sense of where we tend to see CO, carbon dioxide emissions come from. And the transportation sector is a big portion of that. I would tell you diesel vehicles have more of an impact than an automobile does. Automobiles have gotten much cleaner over time, and diesel has as well, but not as clean as the cars have gotten to some point. So Sid and I were talking about this before we started this morning, and he said one of the questions you're probably going to get is, what can we as MPOs do to help get the CO2 emissions down, or you as local governments, what can you do to help get the numbers down? One of the things that we did, and it was before I started, in CAMPO, is Williamson County and Travis County both are doing voluntary mobile emissions testing, so on cars, and that did help lower the numbers. Depending on who you ask, it might have kept us out of non-attainment for quite some time. We're still in non-attainment right now. There's a threat about going into non-attainment, but it's not for ozone, it's for PM 2.5. So I know that's something that probably has not happened in either Bear or some of the other counties in San Antonio yet. I don't know if that's something y'all are talking about as part of your conformity process. I have mentioned to my chair that perhaps we could have discussions with some of our other counties about setting that same standard with some of them. One, to help address the CO2 issue, but also potentially to address the PM 2.5 issue. And while we're on the subject of PM 2.5, because we're all going to be dealing with that one pretty soon, you as local governments, one of the things you could potentially do is, if you've got a lot of development going on in your area, maybe, yes, sir.
I wanted to ask, based on the testing, how did that help reduce any of the emissions? Were there consequences related to the results of the testing? Could you explain what those were?
Yes.
Since we haven't introduced those in Bexar County yet.
And I'll do some of this, and I'll ask Commissioner Long to talk about that as a local elected official. But if you take the mobile emissions test and you don't pass the test, you don't get the sticker. You don't get the registration.
So we're, with inspections rolling off next year, we're not sure how that's going to play out. What we found over time, though, is the point that Ashby made earlier. In the early days of the testing, we were finding a lot of vehicles, but as time went on, those older vehicles were rolling out, and also the auto manufacturers were taking that at the manufacturing end, and so they were cleaner burning vehicles. And so in the latter days of the program, we found fewer and fewer violations, and we worked at the time with the state on a program to be able to provide funds for people to actually replace some of their vehicles. And we actually stopped doing that because there were so few people utilizing that fund. So it worked in the early days. I'm not sure how, especially with inspections going away, how effective that will be. But I think that the auto industry largely took care of that piece of it.
Yeah, and in Bear County, so for our area, for our MPO, we're currently a 4-county MPO, but only Bear County is a non-attainment, EPA designated non-attainment area. We recently just got bumped up from marginal to moderate, and there is a requirement for moderate areas to have the vehicle inspection as a part of the consequence for being non-attainment. And so we are going to implement that next year as required. And the issue is going to be, as the chair just noted, that vehicle registrations will no longer be required in Texas. And at the same time, we're now putting this vehicle emissions testing requirement on our citizens because we were required to. And that's going to be the confusion for most of the folks in our county. They're going to think, oh, statewide, no longer need vehicle registrations, no longer need,
Vehicle inspections.
Inspections, I'm sorry, yeah, for the vehicle registration. And so, but now with this vehicle emissions testing requirement coming online for Bear County, we're going to have to do that. So it's going to cause some confusion in our area. We're a little worried about that, but it's a requirement that we have to follow.
I just want to ask one other question. If we impose the inspection, can we impose a penalty such as saying if you don't pass, you can't register your car?
Yes, that's the penalty.
The state gives
That is
us
the
the
penalty.
authority to do that?
Yeah, that is the penalty.
Thanks. Even for vehicle emissions, which is separate from the others?
So yes, that's the emissions testing is the requirement, and if you fail, you're not allowed to register your vehicle.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Keep turning this off. So these are just some examples of performance measures that other areas have used, and we can get into that later. And also there's some case studies. We'll send the slides out to everybody from both Colorado and Virginia that can be used. So that's all we have in terms of the slides.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Vanessa Fuentes. I serve on Austin City Council. Happy to be here today. I was just saying, it seems like we're a little ahead of time, I would like to hear about those case studies if we have time to review.
Can you consultant speak to them?
Yeah, I would, some of those last few ones, I'm really sort of curious if any impact that they've made. If you could kind of, in the interest of
So
time,
maybe
get
talk
to that.
about just the Virginia study, and then we can back in if we still have time to Colorado.
So I don't think our consultants are here, are they, by any chance, Sonia, HDR? They're the ones who put these slides together. We asked them to kind of look to see what, because again, I think for our board, a lot of the questions are normally like, what can we do then? If we're required to establish these targets, what is it that we can implement then to then, assure that we're meeting the target? And again, so we're not very familiar with what other areas have done. So we asked our consultants to put some of these slides together. They looked at a couple of case studies, both from MPO's perspectives and from the DOT's perspective. So this one in Virginia states that it uses the infrastructure carbon estimator, which is probably a tool that they have. We have in Texas, the Texas Transportation Institute puts together some of the same type of estimators, but they use that to evaluate construction-related greenhouse gas emissions from projects as part of the long-range plan. So this is one of the things that, as I was talking to Ashby earlier, what is it that we can do then to, try to meet these targets? And so this is a good example of, again, as you're doing your project calls, as you're asking, entities to submit projects to you, you can add a scoring component using some type of, estimator that looks at how greenhouse gases will be reduced based on that construction of that project. That's one way. I mean, if that's what we're being required to do, and if that's something that the board would instruct us to do, we could include that as part of our project evaluation process as we're looking at projects, to include both as our calls for projects as we're doing those, or for inclusion in our long-range plan. So that's kind of what Virginia did. Colorado, it looks like
Can I ask one question on that?
Sure.
So you're saying, so in general, that's a basic question to ask moving forward with any of the construction process. Like and I'm guessing, given that they're the SMEs in the industry, they're cognizant of the fact that whatever, that's going to be a question being proposed, so they have different techniques and other aspects to keep
I'm
that in
assuming
mind.
as well, but I'm not very familiar. But I mean, I think that's the goal here, right? And it's why these are being established. And I think it happens naturally a lot of times. Again, like with, whether it's because of other government regulations that require, certain vehicles to be, emit so much, or whether it's because construction standards are set that require the reduction of emissions. Those things happen naturally, I would imagine. And so then all we're doing here is measuring, and then if we're doing some type of project selection, it's probably, again, and this is just, what this Virginia State DOT is doing, obviously, they would select projects that have the most benefit at that point.
So one of the things that we were looking at as CAMPO staff, so when the carbon reduction program money started, we asked our board to award, right, how much? $1 million for us to do some analysis on which strategies would be the most effective strategies for us. We have not gotten through that work yet. We're waiting on Federal Highway Administration to approve the advanced funding agreement and the federal.
And how long have we been waiting for that, Ashby?
We've been waiting almost 10 months, Chair. But it's not just ours that has been held up. Every MPO in the state that has programmed carbon reduction money, none of them have been approved. So we don't know why. We've been asking, and in our case,
The
we
irony
have.
of that is just amazing.
We've sent the information 3 or 4 times in some cases, and we email every Monday and call.
Ashby, hang on.
And maybe Sid can help me understand the initial requirement of having to monitor greenhouse gases comes from the overlapping urbanized area by both MPOs?
No, so the requirement is national, right? And the MPOs are required to either follow what the state is doing or to do our own. Now, that the San Marcos, the overlapping urbanized area, the MPO together, so we'll have to establish our own, CAMPO will have to establish our own, whether we follow the state, that's one thing, right? But jointly, we'll have to establish a standard or for San Marcos.
So we're going to have to do it anyway independently. The only thing we have to do for the urbanized area in San Marcos is collectively.
Yes.
Because it's overlapping.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Now, I understand these next comments might not be popular, but I always try to be honest with everybody. So forgive me, please. I think we should do everything we possibly can to try to have a positive impact on environmental issues and traffic and all these things, but I don't think we should also roll over immediately to help facilitate implementing restrictions on us and imposing requirements that might not be attainable over the long term that could hinder building projects, responding to the public, looking for modes of, mobility and moving all this stuff. These type of issues are extremely difficult to measure, to gauge. I think a lot of people like to gather around the conversation more than being efficient in executing things that are actually beneficial and can be weighed and measured. And now look, I'm a country boy. Look, I grew up on a family farm. I still live in a rural county, so I do have a completely different perspective. But typically what I've seen in my years of service is the areas that are the largest in population, that promote economic development the most and are the most active in seeking construction and advancement and moving forward, are the individuals who are also trying to impose more restrictions, limiting construction, having kind of that dynamic of, look, these are the issues and the problems and we need to fix it, but you're also asking for exactly the same thing to happen. So I don't know what that answer is other than us continuing communication, collaborative efforts to try to work together to have positive impacts on it. But just saying this is a great idea to let the federal government in another way to tell us we can't do something we need to do, I think is a bad idea. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
No, I appreciate hearing your perspective. So I grew up in we had 300 people where I grew up in North Texas. So, I appreciate and understand all too well how it is growing up in the country and how things are. And people have different perspectives on, we see grass, we see land out there, we think it's gorgeous. Other folks are saying this is an opportunity to build. So I get that perspective completely on that. I think what the issue here now and what we've had this discussion, at least from CAMPO for the last 10 years, is that a lot of the issues that we thought were just rural-related issues or perspectives have become all our issues because of the urbanization of the build-out. I mean, sprawl is a real thing, and that, that's something that we all are cognizant of and aware of, and, we're taking our budgets and everything else, tell people how it is to transport water in Central Texas. Folks don't understand just how much that costs. And so, I definitely appreciate the fact that, and that's why I was glad to hear from Tim about saying, hey, listen, this is the litigation that's happened here. This is what's occurring from there as well. But I also think to myself, okay, I know where this is going to end up at some point. So what do we do to build up to either, be prepared for what that ultimate end result will be in the future? Or, unfortunately, if that pulls up, quick and dirty and slaps us in the face quicker than normal on these things. And it's the reason why, this kind of meeting, I love this. This is great to have these kinds of perspectives over here because, how are we building toward what we see in the future, but also being honest about the reality is right now. We're not there yet. So how do we make sure that we go ahead and take care of what the reality is right now while moving forward in the future on these things? So I appreciate your perspective.
I'd like to also add, I think that's the perfect example of why we should be meeting and how our communities are linked. And I don't entirely disagree with you on your comments about kind of rolling over, but I think there has to be a movement towards it. If there's some kind of tempered movement towards where we have to be in the long run to make sure not only that we're compliant, but obviously that we are responsive to the community, we're not slowing down construction, and I say that, take that with a little bit of grain of salt, the slowing down construction part, but we're not hindering development in some ways. But at the same time, we have to get to a point where the entire community has to deal with these less emissions. I mean, at some point, the federal government, the state, our local entities are going to have to look at figuring out ways to do this. So I think while I understand what you're saying, absolutely, I think we still have to kind of move towards that. So again, I think that's why it's really smart that we're meeting on these things. Thank you.
Any other comments before?
I'd just like to add a comment too. Using Bexar County as an example, we're not in non-attainment because of the problems within Bexar County. A lot of our non-attainment is because of outside of Bexar County, from the Gulf Coast and all of the gas and oil in South Texas, and the burning of crops and land in Mexico. And it's just the way the wind blows, and it blows into Bexar County, it blows up to Austin too, and it affects us from outside. And so we can only do what we can do to deal with it from our perspective, but we're really, in a really difficult situation to remedy a situation without making drastic changes within our community for things that we can't control from outside our community. And it'll adversely affect all of us, including rural areas right around us. We all just need to try and work together to see if we can resolve it, unless the EPA comes to understand the circumstances that we're in, as well as some other communities that are affected from outside influences. So.
Yeah, and depending on where you live, the transport air makes up anywhere from 40 to 60% of your numbers. And to your point, most of us can do nothing about what blows in from other directions.
We can just put a bubble around our communities. We'll be good. Don't worry about it.
We're also in San Antonio, our Mobility Coalition is working on a meeting set like this, but with all of the MPOs and the Mobility Coalitions along the border, Laredo and the Rio Grande Valley, Corpus. So to Councilman's point about how we're all kind of affecting each other, to have that bigger discussion, I think would be really important.
So usually, if you can take strategies that will improve emissions from ozone, it will also have the same effect on CO2. And so I was in Houston for 11 years before I took this job. And my assistant director, Chairman McCowan was in Dallas-Fort Worth. So we both dealt with that for a long time. Some of the most effective things that we did, especially in the early days of conformity, for us were the emissions testing on vehicles. Also, Commissioner Long made reference to basically what was called the Cash for Clunkers program. So there was a fair amount of that, but we also had gotten to the point in Houston where there weren't that many of those to find anymore. Then one of the other things that we did, and it's less applicable to our two communities, because Houston had a major port, and there were a lot of diesel trucks, especially drayage trucks there, and drayage trucks tend to be very old diesel and very dirty diesel trucks. We were actually running a loan program to replace those diesel trucks. But we had gotten to the point, and I've been in this job now for 10 years, but we had gotten to the point before I left in 2014 where all the cost-effective measures were pretty much gone. And we were down to the things that were very expensive that didn't reduce tons of emissions, but reduced pounds, and in some cases, fractions of pounds.
And that's the problem, right? Is that, realistically speaking, what does the science allow for us ultimately to do? And then you got to be a good steward of public funds. So if we're going to throw all this money at it, it's going to be a finite effect. Should we really be doing that?
One of the things that I've said to Federal Highway Administration when I've been in Washington recently is we need to have, some analysis done of the existing federal conformity program. It's my position that that program may have run its course, that we may have gotten all that we can get out of it for now, and I want them to do an analysis. Is it still effective for what we're trying to do? Sis says no.
I think she has an opinion.
Yeah, as a new non-attainment area, coming into this process, most of the folks that are non-attainment in Texas have been for decades. San Antonio, Bexar County, pretty recent, and just the processes that we have to go through are so antiquated. They established these back in the 90s, and we're still using the same requirements that were placed on us back then. The process that's put on the MPO, because again, the requirement obviously for non-attainment on the transportation side are placed on the MPO and our plans and programs, have just really deteriorated a lot of the work that we do as an MPO, because that's our focus. It has to be. We're constantly doing conformity, and it takes up so many resources. And the little money that you get to implement projects, to clean the air, it is not worth the headache of the work that's required on the agency. So I would say that, it's beyond time to look at those requirements and the work that's placed on us.
I have argued for years that conformity is a numbers game.
Yeah.
And air got cleaner not because of conformity, but because of the vehicle standards. The emission standards on vehicles were tightened, and the vehicles got cleaner, and the air got cleaner.
So, yes, Commissioner.
Yeah, so I've resisted from engaging because I
saw you turn your mic to the
Biting your
side.
tongue down there.
you guys, the problem with this is, I understand that people have intention to make things better as far as air quality. What is being forced upon us doesn't do that in any meaningful way. And so it makes people like me that are already suspicious of these types of processes even more jaded. It's a problem. It would be I think it would be a really positive step for our MPOs to get together. And instead of me just yelling about it at a policy board meeting going, this is madness, this isn't the way government should act, this is completely ineffective, actually try to force a change there and actually speak up together and say, hey, we have different viewpoints on what makes up this problem, but we all agree that this process that we're using does nothing about it. Or like you're saying, we have people come and talk to us about making a 0.2% change, and it's costing the people of Bexar County these emissions testing. And no matter what we do, all the changes that we can make in transportation, I don't remember, Sid, those numbers though, they're hundreds of percents or tens of percents change, and it's silly, and it makes the overall intent,
I think that's, for me, one of the action items that we take from this. And Ashby, I know you're on several national boards. as it relates to MPOs, that we put together some thoughts on, to Sid's point, this is a system that was set up over 3 decades ago, or almost 3 decades ago, and did it achieve some things? Maybe, maybe not, but if we're trying to move forward in a meaningful way where we're using dollars effectively to move the needle, then let's look at other things that still don't hamper us moving forward as a region to do the construction and the things that we need to do that our constituents and our communities are demanding. But, you know, it's, you know, in Texas, and the state government, they run agencies through the sunset provision. This needed to go through that process about 15 years ago. But maybe that's what we advocate for, but don't, you know, it's, when I was, had a big group that I was managing, I said, don't just bring me a problem, bring me solutions. And so we don't just say it's broken, but what do we go forward with and say, and here's our recommendation. And so, you know, I think that's one of our action items coming out of today.
No, Madam Chair, I think you put it best. They're not mutually exclusive. We want to, you can solve this issue while actually making sure that we keep up with the growth and development that we need from there. And if the science isn't good, which is essentially what y'all are telling us, and we don't know, we just work here, right? You know, then coming up with a viable alternative and solution on those things should be something that everyone should want in the end, as opposed to throwing money at stuff that we say, hey, listen, it's not solving the issue.
Well, and that's the cash for clunkers. That's why we quit doing it, because it was money sitting there, but we literally didn't have any more cars to fix. Let's keep moving so we can wrap this up and keep going.
So we're done with
Okay.
our slides, Madam Chair.
All right, great. Well, so then we'll circle back now to item number 2. If we can get those slides up, and who's going to take the lead on that
Let
one?
me see. Just text that? Oh,
Oh,
I don't know. I know Heather was doing it. I thought Keela was. Okay.
and Heather, you can do it from there, or if you want to do it from the table. Yeah, go ahead and, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't have to do the head turn thing.
Yeah, as Ashby mentioned, it was Akila that was going to give this presentation, but she's sick today, so it'll be helpful for me to see the screen here. So, let's see. You gotta go back. Back.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Heather. I should have moved it back.
No, it's, yeah, it's just you.
Yeah. Is this the most efficient way to do this? Go all the way back? Okay.
I don't know, it depends on how many slides you have.
All right, so here today, I'm Heather Ashley Nguyen. I'm the TP&D director at the Austin District, working under Tucker. I'm here today to talk about the I-35 planning environmental linkage studies that we're currently undergoing. And really, you know, it's great to be here today because we're really preaching to the choir here. The problem that we're trying to solve is probably the problem that we all had when we drove here today. We have you know, population growth, as we all know. We have congestion, and we have, you know, we have crashes along the corridor for safety. Now, in terms of safety analysis, in the 4-year period from 2019 to 2023, we had over 10,000 crashes and 64 fatalities. Now, this is over 10% higher. This is 10% higher than the statewide average for interstate highways, and really the top 5 factors are what we always see: speeding, driver inattention, and then the others of unsafe lane change and following too closely in some of those things. Now, as Councilmember Mateer was talking about sprawl here, I think, again, preaching to the choir on all of this, our population and employment will increase 2.5 times by 2050, and so you know, this is definitely part of the problem we're trying to address here. And this slide here shows the congestion today here in it showed in 2022. There are areas that are fair, but you know, the no build into 2035 into 2050 is you know, our corridor will be failing by then if we do nothing. The overview of the study, this is just kind of the existing section there, 3 general purpose lanes in each direction with frontage roads or 4. This project is almost 50 miles in length and stretches between Austin and San Antonio. Now, what is APEL? APEL is definitely a planning level study. Once we get into schematic and NEPA, at the end of schematic and NEPA is when you buy right of way. That is not what this is. This is a planning study. And I know in Hayes County, we had done an implementation study, but at the time, we had only established 1 lane in each direction. But fast forward to what we're building now in Austin, and Hayes and Williamson County are 2 lanes in each direction. And so knowing that San Antonio also is building, more than 1 lane in each direction, we needed a refresh on our previous studies. And what APEL does is it gives stakeholder input early in the process and brings innovation and some other improvements as well. Now, what we're looking to establish is a future transportation corridor. We had established a future transportation corridor previously with our implementation plan that was a 1 lane in each direction. But in general, we haven't just determined what those are. I know San Antonio has a different use of their future transportation corridor. We have 2 non-tolled high HOV managed lanes in each direction throughout all of our Capital Express program. And so what we're trying to do is I know that at least in San Marcos we had a NEPA study that we were doing, and we in this 50 miles we have a lot of ramp reversals or drainage improvements or improvements that we need to do through here. But to build the full FTC between Austin and San Antonio is a few years away. And so what we're trying to do is establish when each of these NEPA projects come through between the cities that we plan for the future and make sure that we have available space to where it's easier to implement a link connection between the 2 later on. So yeah, this is a little bit more about a future transportation corridor, like I just mentioned. Additional study considerations, I think, are TSM and TDM strategies. TSMs are, incident management, hero operations like we have in our area. TDM is some of the strategies that CAMPO, I know, is trying to use their 10CR on and looking at carpooling and some of those other strategies like that. So right now, we are in the middle of the PEL, and like I mentioned, other breakout projects that are NEPA that would do those environmentally cleared projects that would, at the end of those projects, start buying right away and looking for construction funding. We would accommodate whatever is develops out of this PEL study. Now, we had open houses in February. We had 116 attendees, 6 elected officials, and again, what we heard was, an interest of rail in the FTC, and that's something that would definitely need to consider independent utility. Logical termini of what improvements you're putting in that FTC. Congestion and safety. We heard bicycle pedestrian needs as well. But just as the purpose and need showed, we're trying to address congestion and safety and population growth in terms of that. So yeah, the congestion, the themes here, congestion, like I mentioned, rail was pretty heavy in some of our areas, transit, future growth. So yeah, we will be presenting a report. Out of these open houses, we really didn't see any more need to go out anymore. We're going to be pulling all the information together and documenting the information that we received, and then the next public outreach would be those projects that would go into the NEPA phase to purchase right away. So that's all I have today. Any questions?
So one of the things we talked about last December, whenever it was we got together, was we had presentations on what was going with the CapEx project, and then what was going on in San Antonio. And in terms of something that's doable and connecting the regions, this is probably the most doable and achievable thing that we can do. And the managed lane concept that would carry from North Travis County, Williamson County, all the way through Bexar County, I think is something that our regions can come together and really encourage, promote, because again, that is something that is within all of our purview to do. We've got our TxDOT folks leading this discussion, and you know, there's lots of other options and things out there, but this is something that I think we could actually focus on and start achieving. And so thanks for the update on that, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm very interested in the Pell and the study that you're doing. I'm wondering if we can get a copy of that over in San Antonio when it's all done. I'm interested. I think it was slide. I'm not sure, the one where you talked about the public meetings. There it is, 15 and 16, that people discussed safety, growth, congestion, access rail. That's all the same things that we're hearing, obviously, in San Antonio. And I'm very interested and been talking a lot with some players about rail. So Judge Brown, Mayor Watson, and Judge Sakai in Bexar County, we've had some lengthy discussions about the viability of it. And I think, I mean, everybody in this room will understand that that's a heavy lift and a lot of money. But it's the kind of thing that I think we need to plant the seed for, at least in thought, and try to figure out going forward. The planning and environmental studies are about improving these routes, right? And not just rail. Obviously, we have to talk about building the capacity for those that wouldn't choose rail, and even, you know, cyclists and pedestrians, which sounds a little far-fetched, even more than rail in some ways, right? But there are cyclists that bike that route. So I think we should all be part of this.
Of them.
Yeah, exactly. Not me. I'm not a cyclist. I can do that. But I do think that rail should continue to be part of that discussion. It also should be an important part of any planning as we move forward. It's time for a serious discussion on that as partners along that corridor. And it's just, you know, the common future, the common themes that we're talking about, and rail as part of all of that. So thank you. Thanks so much.
Are there other, Kevin, I know you're going to weigh in.
I mean, well, Heather, thank you. Just I have a question. So right now the NAX project is two managed lanes, two open lanes in each direction with a one managed lane. And what y'all are talking about coming down from CapEx is not that. It's, did you say two and two?
Yes, sir. Two managed lanes in each direction, buffer separated with striping. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so and then this is looking at that same?
This is looking at, we're not going to determine what would be in that footprint, but we had previously in our area only established one lane in each direction. So this is at least showing the width that would accommodate at least two lanes in each direction, which would also, if you wanted to, in the future NEPA, establish that rail as the build alternative, you know, that could be achievable in that footprint that we're setting aside.
Right. So I think when you're sort of drawing, you know, we've been doing this a long time now, and you hear these conversations, and you know, when you've been doing it for a long time, you immediately go, that's not going to work because of this. You know, you get sort of jaded, and I think that's, you know, why I'm running one more time. I'm going to be done, because I think that it's time for someone else to come and, you know, have their bad ideas. But I think what we're doing here, what's very helpful about this is you're leaving that transportation envelope open. And it will allow for things that may come along in the future, while at the same time accommodating interim projects. I think that sometimes we fail to understand time, and we want silver bullets. And first of all, those silver bullets aren't feasible financially. And so you can take incremental steps, and those may include managed lanes with transit options in them. And then proving things will work, and then making your larger investments, because we all know that you don't sort of do R&D with public money. And the enormity of a rail project I mean, you know, y'all's CapEx project, a rail project makes that look like chicken feed, you know. So I think that I'm really appreciative that you guys are doing this work. We are talking about, you know, essentially building bridges through all of these communities, which for me, having been born and raised in New Braunfels, I kind of go, we're going to be put under a bridge. And then when I want to go somewhere, I say, thank God there's a bridge. You know, so there's give and take in all this. But I think that the way y'all are addressing this is great. I'm really appreciative of the efforts to move forward, and then move forward too with a shared vision that other people can be involved in too, because I think that leaving these transportation windows open does exactly that. So thank you for your work on this.
Kevin, I appreciate that. And, you know, one of the things that, to your point, that this does is it preserves option for whoever's sitting in these chairs in the future. I'm going to drill down a little bit to Williamson County. We've been very aggressive in our transportation planning, but also delivering. In the last 18 years, we've built over 860 new lane miles, and not new, over 350 brand new lane miles in the county, and 800 and something of refurbished and improved lane miles. We've done a corridor study that lays out sort of what we want to look like forever. I mean, we did that for ultimate build out. And the reason we did that is because we were growing so fast that we felt like if we could at least lay those out, and we've actually done preliminary engineering on them, and we're buying right of way from willing sellers. But what that does, most of those I won't see built, certainly in my tenure or even potentially in my lifetime. But it is, whoever's sitting in these seats in the future, it gives them options. And so, you know, and I think planning to this direction, whoever's here, they'll have options.
I'm going to interrupt you there, because it gives them options that we didn't have.
Right.
And that's what's important, you know, so yeah, concur completely.
You know, this is such a great conversation. I recently went back, I still call it back home, you know, I've been in the Austin area for 26 years. DFW, I went back. And I met with our compatriots on the Dallas City Council, with DART and a lot of the rail and people in the North Texas COG. Actually, Councilmember Fuentes will be doing the same thing in a couple of weeks. And what was surprising to me was a couple of things. One, if you would have told me as a kid in the 80s that DART would be around North Texas, I would have told you you're crazy, because we just didn't, public transit, that's not a thing. That has never been a thing. You know, and especially for us who lived out in the country, in Denton, Argyle, Roanoke, that area, Trophy Club, you just didn't do that. And now you're having that in North Richland Hills, in Grapevine, Fort Worth, and everything else right there, and it's just been shocking to see where that is. Two, more importantly, to your point, what they talked to me about was that they're actually finishing one of their last rail lines that they had bought the right-of-way for in 1983. Now, not to make y'all feel old, I was 3 years old in 1983.
Okay, you made us feel
but they had the vision, hey, listen, it doesn't make economic sense now to do this. It's not feasible now, but it doesn't mean, to your point, what are we doing in the future to make sure we're cognizant of it and have the options, as you put it? Because I think oftentimes people get on previous councils or commissions, like, why didn't they do that then? Well, guess what? It wasn't economically viable, and we've got to be good stewards of what we're doing over here as well. But it doesn't mean it's not that way in the future. So to build out, I mean, this is where, you know, I'll give Heather more credit than Tucker on this. You know, I love seeing what TxDOT is doing to be more innovative and more inviting about the various different options in the future, not just going marrying to one specific way, but giving options for folks to make sure that what Texas looks like, what this Central Texas area looks like in the future, is one that has various options and viable.
And you teed it up well. I was going to say this is a partnership between San Antonio and Austin, so thank you to Charles and Clayton as well.
Okay, so Heather and Charles, not Tucker. Okay.
I just want to make a quick point, and very well said. Affordability always comes up when we're talking about rail, and I always hear a $35 billion price tag, and of course we have to be good stewards. That $35 billion price tag I hear is from Dallas all the way through San Antonio to Laredo, which is, I think, the ultimate. Maybe not everybody here, but that's the
That might
ultimate
just run
dream
the
for
right
a
of
lot
way.
of us. Yeah. But think about this. We're already spending $25 billion on lane and road construction for what amounts to a total of 25 miles between San Antonio and Austin. So I think that it's not as far off as we think. We're going to have questions. We're going to have obstacles. We're going to have a lot of challenges. But at this point, I don't think we any longer have a choice than to be discussing rail. So thank you.
I'd like to just chime in, and I'd like to know what are the inputs that are going into the discussion and the potential plans. I was just listening to this, and I've written down 7 things that I think I would want to know about is being considered. For example, time, which, how fast can you get somewhere? Or how long is it going to take you to do something? And the costs, which we're talking about right now, the billions of dollars. And time is money. And so if somebody was going to use a rail line, that saves them a lot of time. On the other hand, what do you do to get on that rail line, that first mile? Or what do you do when you get off that rail mile and that last mile? And then people, how many of them want to go ahead and have more total control over their ability to go where they want to go, when they want to go, leave when they want to go, and how much of that control do you give up if you get on a rail line or things of that nature. And we're not just talking about moving people, we're talking about moving freight. And we already know the railroad isn't going to give up their golden goose that lays that egg, so are we just talking about moving people? And that means you're still going to have 50% of the traffic on the road being trucks, like it is today for those people who don't get on the rail. And then it's economic development. And what I mean is there are businesses today all along this route that would not want to see 50% of the people just go right by and not stop for lunch or to shop or things like that, because there's a rail line that'll get them all the way to Dallas or all the way to Austin from San Antonio. And then there's future development. What kind of development might not take place if the rail line's just going to pass you by? Or if it's going to stop along the way, where does it stop? Who gets to the benefit from that? And then the safety factor too. It's probably a lot safer to be on rail than it is, in traffic. So there's one of the benefits. I don't know how many of those inputs are being considered and how they're being considered, and how that all adds up to dollars and cents, or the inclination of people to get involved and take advantage of it, or how well we're going to be able to economically grow through that. So I'd love to see all of the inputs that are being put into this kind of planning to make sure that we're thinking about as much as we can, and not just talking about, well, how many billions of dollars we're going to spend on concrete and steel and asphalt. So.
Well, I will say we're taking comments all the time, and so we will take into the comments that you've mentioned today, because those weren't up there. Those are really good points. But one of the things about Appel is it starts the discussion earlier before NEPA. And again, all these alternatives will be studied in depth during NEPA, and then a preferred alternative will come out over the no build. And I think everyone in here today is no build is not a viable option, right? But all really good points. We'll take all of that into consideration when we write up the report. And then, after the report's published, we'll have plenty of discussions during NEPA. But all those are, great topics. Now, now that we are solving, the metro cities, that we do have funding available to, into that 2030 timeframe, address some of these areas within the link, and at each one we'll have to have logical termini for each NEPA. We're not going to be able to just do the full 50 miles on its own, but I know out of the study what we want to do is determine what's in the way right now, what would have to be rebuilt in order for us to get a lanes in each direction through some of the things that are under, that we've just recently built. You're pointing?
Okay, thanks.
Uh-huh.
Any other comments?
Actually, Judge Brown just arrived, and I think this is the thing he wanted to talk on. We just had a discussion about rail. Sorry to kind of put you on the on the spot before we move on.
You get 30 seconds, Judge.
Cynthia, this is Charles. I just want to mention too, the other thing that the Pell study does is it allows San Antonio and Austin to make sure that what we're planning for on our side is going to match up with what they're planning for on the Austin side. I think that's a big deal because we don't want to solve a San Antonio problem and just shift it to Austin and vice versa. So that's an important aspect of this.
Well, and
immediately.
that's really important because, the days of being able to plan in silos are gone. and I don't, I don't think that was happening. I mean, there's been discussion between the regions for a long time. I think it's just a higher level of engagement now, so. All right, is there anything else on, okay, so you're finished, Heather. I know, Judge Brown, you wanted to talk about this, but we've sort of finished, but you can jump in with a few comments if you'd like.
Oh, well, thank you. Is this item 2?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So just general desire. Oh, okay.
Up is on.
Up is on, okay. General desire to get passenger rail between, Travis County area to Bexar County area in the plan as we redo it, which is, I think, what we're talking about, right? So, the brief version is this is something that everyone from the chamber to rail advocates or transportation advocates in Travis County are really interested in. I've not heard anyone argue against this, either at the local or the state level, frankly, having better passenger rail transportation between Travis County area, Bexar County area. So I'd love to see that in the 50-year plan? Is that the next thing that we're?
So our 2050 plan is what you're referencing?
Yes, that one. Okay. So that's my pitch. Thank you all very much.
Okay.
He's so damn convincing.
There you go.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to just add, have we looked back at the Lone Star Rail? I mean, that's a blueprint. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? And how do we apply it going forward?
So I see a heavy sigh. There are a few of us around when Lone Star Rail was being discussed. I think the CAMPO region spent about $12 million. Y'all were wise and held yours back. Lone Star, I think, had a fatal flaw from the beginning because there was no funding mechanism. And you can do all the great planning in the world, but if you don't have a plan to pay for it, the planning is sort of for naught. And I think that's what we realized, and y'all were a little bit faster and smarter than us. We learned it a little slower, but until you identify, number one, where's it going to, what the right-of-way is going to cost, and what are the federal hurdles, and all that, and just some ballpark number, and where that money's going to come from. And that's why I think the discussion that we had earlier on the linkage study and doing something allows for options in the future, whatever those might be, but just saying rail only means we get nothing done.
So,
Kevin?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. So, I mean, we're almost done, so you give me another opportunity. Lone Star Rail is fatally flawed because of its formative legislation didn't allow for, you didn't have a partner in TxDOT. And what they're doing now is a huge departure from what they've done in the past. And I think it's important for the proponents of rail or other types of other modes of transportation and the TxDOT right-of-way to understand what a huge step these transportation envelopes are. It's huge, and it's something that Kevin Wolf worked on for a long time with TxDOT. They're not saying we're moving away from asphalt and rubber tires. That's not what TxDOT's about. They're about moving people and goods, and that's the way we do it right now. But this is a huge departure for them and a huge step, and I really appreciate it. And I want the proponents of other modes to understand it is a huge step. And that right of way that they have down 35 is what killed Lone Star Rail. Lone Star Rail, They said UP was a partner. UP said, well, I'm not sure who you are, but, send me some more letters.
I don't think they quite said it like that.
Yeah. So, and so this step that they've taken is enormous, because that was the second thing that's what really killed Lone Star Rail. Was they were saying, okay, we're going to use UP's lines. UP said, no, we're not. We're going to move lines and do a whole other line, other end, and where there aren't people. Well, there were actually people there, so they had a lot of problems, but this is a huge step.
Madam Chair, just one clarification. So, not proposing Lone Star Rail, just want to be real clear about that.
The question came up over here.
Oh, no, I know. I just wanted to focus. So I've had great conversations with Tucker Ashby, with Jeff Davis, who works at TxDOT and is, sort of over, I guess, rail at TxDOT, something like that, who has done, I think, a great job applying for many grants that the FRA has offered. There was a little snafu on one, but I think he has figured out a way to overcome that. Me and Judge Sakai of Bexar County went to DC and met with the Union Pacific, lobbyist, Wes, had a really good conversation. He gave us some examples of other communities where Union Pacific and passenger rail are working well together. I think it's important to keep them at the table for all of this. And whether it is figuring something out with Union Pacific, maybe we double track in certain areas and help them with that funding. Maybe it's a new line, I don't know. Brightline is also interested in talking to us about that. They're actually coming here. I've met with them in Florida. I think we're going to meet with them here. I think there's a lot of exciting options, either on existing track, maybe with some modifications. I think there's potential funding this time, where Amtrak and the FRA have offered to pay, I believe, 80% of the cost of adding more Amtrak lines, where we, the state, locals, somebody needs to come up with 20%. So in my opinion, it's very different than Lone Star Rail, in that there are good conversations with all partners going on. There are some real funding mechanisms, and I would just love to see that as part of the, what is it?
2050.
The 2050 plan. So thank you.
I think that also that's kind of the point of this discussion, right? Is you didn't get to see this part of the presentation, Judge, but they did mention that in public discussions, rail is coming up.
Okay.
And so we are seeing it for more than just a handful of people. But I think, and to your point too, and to the mayor's point. We don't want to reinstitute Lone Star Rail. I understand that. I felt the energy change a little bit when she said that. But there are lessons to be learned, right? Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a very good point. And we're not talking, I'm not proposing that it's just rail. There has to be a diverse set of options. I mean, there was cycling up on that board too. So I think that at this point, we just can't afford to talk about our common future without talking about the option of rail at this point. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to say real briefly that oftentimes rural counties or outside areas are often looked at like the basement, like we'll put all the pipes and utilities and everything over there. That's exactly how we felt during the Lone Star Rail conversation. That's not mine, I'm sorry. We heard about 80 miles of freight relocation track at a public meeting. So whatever the process is forward, I think everybody should be included. I think it should be a transparent one. There are real people affected, not millions, but a lot of history and legacy in those tracts of land and small communities. We can't fit everything that's needed on I-35 because it's built out. We all know that. We talk about it. There's things that can be done to improve it, but that's not the total fix. Other projects and other places are going to have to happen to ease some of that congestion or whatever type of mode it is. And that's going to have to happen in Ed's County, our county, and others, and Comal and Hayes, and off of 35. That are going to be a result of those type of conversations. So I just wanted to say that so everybody's mindful of it. So we should all be talking about all those things at the same time, not after the fact.
Thank you.
I think any idea, any plan that you have regarding transit has to have the whole complexity and looking at the whole ecosystem of all the various different parts to it. Because oftentimes, just like you said, you'll see something right here and you're like, wait, but how does this affect me? And if it's not going to affect me, it's not going to benefit my constituents, it's not going to benefit me or my family or anything else from there. Why would I care about that? And what I love hearing from what Judge Brown's doing over here is that he's getting everyone involved on this. I mean, I will tell you, Pflugerville, if not for 130, would still be that small little town over there with theirs. They completely transformed it, but that was a byproduct of what was happening on 35 and looking to see what was occurring, what other mechanisms we have in place. Now we're looking at 973. What can we ultimately look at that? Because we know the growth and support what's happening there, Samsung and everything else from there. So it's important in these areas that you keeping, just like you said, I love the way you put that, is that you're keeping aware of that there's real folks over here who are affected by that. Let them know that they're not going to be byproducts of this, but actually involved and at the table running discussions.
Okay, thank you. I think that concludes item number 2. Let's jump on to item number 4.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Clifton Hall. Oh, my title slide's gone. There we go. My name is Clifton Hall. I'm the Transportation Planning Program Manager at the Alamo Area MPO. Today I'll be discussing our regional freight study, which we've just kicked off with our consultant, Cambridge Systematics. To start, we'll talk about
I think that's CAMPO's presentation.
Okay. I thought it looked different.
There it is.
There we go. Apologies. All right. So again, my name is Clifton Hall. I'm the Transportation Planning Program Manager at Alamo Area MPO. We'll be discussing our regional freight study, which we just kicked off with our consultant. There it is. Man, a lot of mishaps this morning. So just to start off, we wanted to talk about the goals and objectives of our freight study. This is actually something we've been initiating since I've been here. I started about 4 years ago, almost exactly, in 2020. And just with a lot of things going on with conformity and different things, we've really been engaging in kind of a long-term process to get this study kicked off, so we're very excited to get started. But really the goals is just to have a better understanding of freight, both what's happening with freight and our infrastructure to match that in the AMPO region. As you all know, we're growing rapidly, both AMPO and CAMPO, both of our regions, as well as the state of Texas as a whole. So what we really want to do is align with statewide goals, what I call extra-regional goals with other regions, other efforts and modes, and really just build on those initiatives that are already happening, but also localize that to really understand what freight is doing in the Alamo region and what it will be doing in the future, at least our best guess, right? So the objectives that we'll use to get there is to analyze our current and projected growth. We talk about our growth as a region and commuting patterns in our normal MTP process, but we really want to go beyond that to really kind of project where freight is going to grow. So we have some ideas about that, but we want to see the data behind it and really guide it that way. We want to engage regional stakeholders. This is another huge element, is just really understanding who are our freight stakeholders in the Alamo area and who will they be in the future. There's a lot happening in both AMPO's and CAMPO's regions, and so we just really want to hear from them what their concerns are, what their intelligence is as far as what's going to be happening in the future. And so that's going to be a key part of that. Of course, safety is always one of our #1 priorities. So we want to analyze freight corridor safeties and figure out what risks are involved in our growing freight system, understand freight and land use planning issues that again are associated with growth, and then evaluate the infrastructure needs that we'll need to meet that growth. And then something that's very important to me and to us at AMPO is to develop a prioritized project list and programs that will come from this. So projects that are maybe low-hanging fruit that we can do immediately, and a program for freight that our staff can maintain, that we can continue to develop new projects and meet the growing need for freight planning in our region. So again, we talked a little about linkages. We have a ton of shared non-highway transportation assets, including airports, pipelines, and rail that we'll be looking into. But I think a lot of the freight activity in our 2 regions happens via highway and trucking. And so we want to look at interregional highways and trip activities and really focus on our key highway freight corridors, such as I-35, State Highway 130, US 281, and US 183. And really focus on that north-south CAMPO and AMPO freight activity as our 2 regions continue to build up. I was just thinking about it earlier, you know, the freight market doesn't really care about our urban area boundary, right? It doesn't care about our metropolitan planning area boundary. And so we have to be really nimble and really responsive, I think, in order to meet the needs that we're going to have in the future. And so we were really excited that we were able to procure the same, competitively, of course, the same freight consultant that y'all were using because we knew that would help integrate those 2 things together. And we're also looking at freight-intensive industries and supply chains, which are growing. There's potentially an electric car factory coming into San Antonio. There's already one in Austin. and it's in one of those developing corridors in State Highway 130. And so we want to look at that. We want to look at electronics, the chip plants that might be coming in between our two regions, agriculture, petroleum, and warehousing that's going to support those industries. Our project team, again, is Cambridge Systematics. It's being led by a San Antonio native, maybe not native, but local to San Antonio, Hannah Santiago. And then her deputy is Gui Liao, who's been helping out as Hannah's been on leave for a little while. Mike Williamson is our principal for that. And then our primary subject matter expert is Daniel Wong with Cambridge Systematics, who'll be looking at our research and background and our long-range policies and strategies. And then an AMPO alumna, Linda Vela, will be helping with our develop our near to midterm implementation plan, and Hannah will be leading the final plan integration. So our schedule, again, task one is the project management part. We'll be looking at our different tasks that will make up this study. So of course, we'll start with research and background in the first 7 months to really define those goals and objectives we talk about. Task three will be really to look at the low-hanging fruit. What projects and programs can we implement in the long and short term to begin the freight planning process and to start develop things that we can integrate into the entire metropolitan planning process. Starting at about month 11, we'll start looking at long-range strategies and policies. How can we continue on that short-term work and make it sustainable? And then the final report will take about 3 months at the end, in months 15 through 18. Something we'll be integrating is a freight industry forum, where we'll be looking at, again, industry expertise to develop transportation priorities and identify needs and concerns. And so we'll have 2 of those in months 7 and 11. And then something that isn't set in stone, but something I encouraged in the scope of our study is to really vet out the feasibility of a freight advisory committee, a committee that we can meet regularly. There will be a stakeholder-based committee that will help us to continue to keep our ear to the ground as freight continues to develop, and we can continue to integrate that industry expertise into our planning process when it comes to freight, because it's so vital. We'll also have several oversight committees, which will be more of our usual suspects, our local stakeholders involved with our TAC and TPB, as well as a few project updates sprinkled in there as well. For research and background, this will, again, integrate a bunch of plans that have already taken place at both the statewide and extra-regional level, as well as some mode-based studies such as the statewide parking study, the Freight Network Technology Operation Plan, but also the long-range plans for Texas, the current one being Texas Delivers 2050, as well as the CAMPO Freight Plan. So we'll begin research on those, and then for data, we have truck data such as volume, hours of delay, reliability, pavement condition, and then some more infrastructure-based things where we can identify corridor needs for bridges, whether they be vertical clearance or load restrictions, really get a good idea of what deficiencies we might have in our key freight corridors. And then also looking at mode-specific data like economic data such as Transearch, which is commodity flow data, what is being shipped via freight, and then parking supply and demand as well, which is a big issue right now. Oh, and one more thing. So it was really important to me as we developed this freight scope that these data sources are sustainable as well. We had a bad experience at one point acquiring some freight data that we didn't end up using as much as we intended to, and it became very hard to use very quickly. And so we want to make sure that we're kind of building in capacity for our staff as well to be able to maintain these freight data sets and be able to use these over and over again and use them or lose them if we need to, but then make sure that we can keep acquiring the right data without encumbering a lot of funding towards it, if that makes sense. So task 3 will be to develop our near to midterm implementation plan. So again, this should really be low-hanging fruit. What can we do basically within the TIP timeframe or the 10-year plan timeframe? What projects, programs can we prioritize? What strategies can we implement? And again, I think this will be mainly led off or will be primarily informed by our stakeholder groups. And so really hearing what their immediate needs are or what they project the near-term needs will be is going to be really important. And so as a part of that process, we'll look at roles and responsibilities of this group, as well as identifying barriers and obstacles, looking at phasing and dependencies between projects, and then really defining what success means for our region for freight. For long-range studies and policies, we'll again be looking a lot at those previous plans that have been done already and localizing those policies to our region. When we talk about what's important for freight in Texas, there's a ton of overlap with our region specifically, but what in San Antonio will give us a competitive advantage and help us to move forward in the most efficient and productive way possible. And so something we'll look at is inputs from our study oversight committee, the regional freight industry forum we talked about, and then other industry inputs, so that we really get down to that a kind of a holistic regional freight goods movement stakeholder group that hopefully can continue forward past the study even.
My apologies. Is there a way we can get a copy of that slide deck? Because even
Yes.
yeah, you're doing an eye test for us.
Yeah, I kind of realized that. So sorry about that. My apologies.
These are first world problems. We're okay. Just asking.
I appreciate that. There are copies printed back here. And so our Deputy Director, Sonia.
No, I think he means mail to us so we can put it on our computer at home
Yeah, right.
and blow it up.
Yeah, we'll make all of these available. We'll make all of these available after the meeting for sure.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. And so the final plan will really integrate these two, I guess all 3 tasks, 4 tasks, depending on how you want to count them, into a cohesive story, something that we can document and carry forward. But again, what's more important about the process is what comes out of it in terms of sustainable practices that we can continue to use over and over again, both on the data side and the planning process side. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. So these are just examples of other similar final plans that involve visual storytelling and some great visual examples from the Tech Stop Freight Network Technology and Operation Plan. All right, that is all I have for the presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
May I ask a question? I saw the time frame over 18 months. Maybe I missed it, but when do you want to start and what date will it be completed? Because it just says month.
Yeah. We've technically started now, and so we're going to be working to schedule. I think developing this presentation was one of the first tasks we were able to give the consultants. It just recently initiated in the past couple weeks, and so we'll be working on scheduling that first oversight committee meeting and beginning task 2 as part of that.
So you're saying about 18 months from now?
Yes, sir.
It should be, okay, thank you.
Just a quick comment. I think it's a very timely discussion, and thank you for the presentation. I was in Laredo a couple of weeks ago with the San Antonio Mobility Coalition. Laredo is interested in forming their own mobility coalition, and I guess it was about 70 people there talking about the massive amount of freight that's coming through Laredo. They're the #1 port in the country, y'all probably know. And they're widening lanes on the international bridges and all of that. They showed us a graphic. It looked like blood in veins, and within 48 hours, that freight is across Texas. So it's in our corridor within a day. So I think this again is really timely, and looking forward to kind of keeping that conversation going, not just with us, but including Laredo as well. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there other questions? Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Nirav Ved. I'm the program manager for CAMPO's freight plan. And what we're talking about today is just the environment or the freight linkages between CAMPO and AMPO. We thought this is a good body to talk about that. Our plan for freight has been ongoing for a little bit over 18 months. We plan on bringing it to the board and TAG for information and action over the next couple of months. But we thought it was a good idea to talk about just the links between our 2 regions. You saw this slide earlier that Clifton referred to, but the one thing I want to point out is that we have highways, we have pipelines, we have airports that are within our region. The one thing that we don't have in the CAMPO's region is what's called a rail hub. Essentially, when freight comes in by rail, for Austin anyways, it either gets dropped off in San Antonio or it gets dropped off at DFW or Houston, and they get trucked in from here. So one of the recommendations that we'll be having for our freight plan is the establishment of a rail hub in our region. Again, a lot of volume goes in between our 2 regions. About 20,000 trucks use I-35 on a daily basis going back and forth between It's the Alamo area MPO and CAMPO. Trucks also utilize 183 and SH-130 as a bypass. Not in terms of volume, it's about 12,000 trucks that use SH-130, but in terms of percentage, it makes up a greater percentage of the traffic on 130 than it does on 35. 281 is also an important corridor, but just in terms of pure volume, not as much as, either 35 or 130. And not all of that traffic is through traffic. Almost 30 to 40% of the truck traffic in our two regions begins or ends in one of our regions, which is a lot of trucks going back and forth every day. The numbers are a little small, but what it shows is that from the CAMPO region to the AMPO region, it's about 75 to 7,600 trucks a day. From AMPO to CAMPO, it's about 8,400. And those trucks sit in a lot of traffic. 35 is no shock, one of the most congested highways in our state and our country, and with very much significant delays for freight and for people. You heard earlier that population is expected to double in our two regions. So is the expected freight tonnage and the value that's going to happen that moves between. So more freight tonnage, more freight value, more trucks on our existing roads. So what can we do? A lot of this has already been discussed earlier. Heather talked about the Pell. We're trying to align the timings between CapEx and NEX, look at alternative routes, and again, like I mentioned earlier, potentially the establishment of a rail hub in the CAMPO region could be a potential way to address some of our challenges. And that's my presentation. So we'll be happy to take any questions now.
So yeah, we're, on the CAMPO side, we're wrapping ours up and look forward to seeing how that interconnects with what you guys are doing at AMPO. I'm looking over at Matt Harris, who is retired from this business, but used to be responsible for a lot of our inner city freight traffic in his former role. But, I think to the point you made, Nirav, a lot of that is just deliveries and truck traffic, getting beer deliveries from the distribution center to HEB. And I think that's important because those deliveries aren't necessarily always happening on I-35 and 183, and those are hitting a lot of other roadways. And
yes, Matt Harris. I'm here as a representative for Cap Metro, but again, in my former life, I had...
Matt, up is on.
It's on,
okay.
Yeah. We had our distribution territory ran from basically Comal County all the way over to Brenham and then down 71 to Columbus, and 85 routes daily, and we had 400 field personnel out there also. But the one thing I would just add to this, to echo Commissioner Long's comments, what's changing and what we saw even in the beer business was the advent of this on-time delivery stuff that you're seeing now. I mean, Amazon, in the 20-odd years that they've been in operation locally, they are now the third largest trucking company in the United States. And that's happened in like 15, literally in 10 years. And everybody's seen it in their neighborhood. It's the local, the UPS, the FedEx, the Amazons are, and what you're seeing is a change, I think, in the way we as consumers are getting our goods. We are no longer necessarily going to be going to the grocery store or going to the Home Depot to get something. We want it delivered, and in many cases, we want it delivered in 2 hours, which actually is pretty amazing to me. And the other thing that's happening is that when the Amazons and the UPS locate, they're locating not in the major urban areas, they're locating, for example, in San Marcos. San Marcos has 2 of them. They have one big warehouse for everything bigger than a microwave, and then they have a whole nother warehouse for everything smaller than a microwave, and literally they truck they transport between those two, going into San Antonio, going into, into Austin. And their plans are, I think, Rudy, I don't know, they have another one coming they had one scheduled for Pflugerville, and I'm not sure when that one's going to pop up. So not only are we seeing just the volume of truck traffic, because Amazon has to get those goods into their warehouse first, but then we're seeing the outbound truck traffic that's added to this simply because of the fact that we're changing the way that we're actually buying our goods to begin with. So I would add that in there.
I wanted, because Matt's much more of the expert than I am, but I think that's an impact on our systems, and it's freight, but sometimes we miss it because we're thinking 18-wheeler kind of freight truck traffic, and I've seen the Amazons with the 2 trailers, and so I think it's important that Amazon, UPS, and all those others, that we make sure that they're stakeholders at the table when we're having this discussion.
I just wanted to mention that we do dive into e-commerce in the plan. You'll be hearing about that in the coming months. One of the things, when you mentioned about the challenges of trying to track an Amazon delivery van, it's not classified as a truck by the Federal Highway Administration. So we had to procure some specialized software to try and account for where those Amazon locations were, and count how many cars essentially were coming in and out of those locations. According to my conversations with Streetlight, the vendor that we used, we're probably the first ones in the nation to do this sort of analysis. So I'll be interested in sharing that with y'all in the coming months.
Isn't that another example? We just had the conversation about what we're talking about from an environmental standpoint, the science not catching up with the reality. Isn't this another example of the definitions and the reality? I mean, the laws and the definitions not keeping up with what we're happening here. I mean, I hate to say this publicly, but like, who's on top of this stuff? Like, I mean, it's, so you said it's the reality now that we're doing there as well. Yeah, well, they're going to come to us, right? But it's like, realistically speaking, if they're putting these mandates and requirements over here with that, why aren't they keeping up with the reality of what's happening in our communities?
You don't have to answer that right now. That was a rhetorical question. So any other comments on freight, either from AMPO or CAMPO's perspective?
I don't know. I just don't take the ride from San Antonio to Austin, and it is horrendous. But I do appreciate that we don't allow trucks in the far left-hand lane. That's, I think, good. So I just want to add that.
Okay, thank you, Nirav. So item number 5, concluding remarks. I think I've written down at least one action item coming out of this. The first one that kind of goes without saying is keeping connected on the Pell study and making sure that and obviously you're taking input all the time, but the next formal either open house or make sure we get that well distributed to both boards and communities so that we can expand, because I was a little disappointed in the participation in the first round. So I think we can expand that. And then the second action item that, or at least I made note of, was the whole issue of the 1990s rules for conformity aren't necessarily working in 2024. And so what parts of it are broken? And then, but more importantly, what can we recommend to fix that? And I think that's something that I think both MPOs would be interested in, because there is a finite pool of resources and we've got to get the best bang for our buck in doing that. Any other comments? Did I miss anything? Or?
So, Chair Long, before we close, I did want to recognize, so we have a National Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations. I'm the current chair until December. And we do have someone here with us from that organization. She happened to be in town for another meeting, and she wanted to come and see how MPOs work. So Caitlin Cook, send it, please.
Welcome.
So
glad you're here.
The conversation about conformity and other things, she has a lot of conversations with folks, staffers on Capitol Hill, on House Transportation and Infrastructure, and Senate EPW. So that information will be carried back
Great, great. Kevin?
I had one, and this is, it will show I have no political future, but we have got to figure out ways to invite private investment back into our transportation. I think that the public-private partnerships were really a casualty of the toll wars and all that's worked out. And, you know, I'll sit here because of my political philosophy and say, hey, we need to let markets dictate things. We need to have markets show how things are going to work. But at the same time, at a state level, we've really taken a stance that really precludes private investment in our transportation in the state. It has been an enormous setback for us in planning. Remember, we used to be able to go, hell, we'll toll that one day.
Yeah.
And, you know, 281 got built that way. We didn't end up tolling it. You know, Prop 1, Prop 7 came along. We figured out other ways to do those things. But it's not really just about tolls. It's about inviting private investment back into the transportation world, because I think a lot of the things that people in this room are interested in, it's going to take those kind of partnerships. And so I don't know if that's a stance that our MPO or even CAMPO would be willing to take. But I think that things can be structured. There could be laws about the abuses that have taken, or the perceived abuses of toll roads, and how long their concessions are, and how much they make, and where the ownership is based, and all those things could be addressed with legislation. And so, I don't know, I'm just throwing that on the table to see if there's any interest in maybe pursuing jointly an effort to make a change in that regard.
No, I think it's a great discussion, and I don't think, you know, the pendulum, you know, has done a complete 180 on who supported tolling and who didn't, and, you know, I think we need to swing it back to the middle, and it's an option that we need to keep on the table, and the PPPs, and, you know, we all in our communities, especially cities who have more authority than counties, do this, that, you know, through TIAs and different things that the cities are able to do on a very localized level in getting the developer to pay for certain things. And counties have even fewer tools, but I think at a statewide level. And, you know, Kevin, I'm happy to brainstorm with you on it. So. Any other concluding comments?
Thank everybody for taking time on a Friday and meeting here in the middle. I think it was a really productive discussion, and I look forward to hopefully having one in the next maybe 6 months or so. Yeah. Thank you. So and I will invite you to the regional one we're working on. Thank you.
Great. And I also thank everybody for being here. Quick shout out to my husband. Happy birthday, Don. But I think this is productive, and I really, really appreciate it. I know staff spent a lot of time getting this together and getting the presentations, and really, really appreciate it. So thanks for y'all's participation. All right. And so we will adjourn at 11:43.
Let's get a group